Okay, ladies and gentlemen, it's 6 p.m. We will call to order the Forest Lake Airport Commission meeting of March the 7th. Secretary Schmidt, if you will take roll.
Yes. Mr. Ashback.
Present.
Mr. Eigner.
Present.
Mr. Dahlbeck.
Present.
Mr. Shipp.
Present.
And Mr. Steeler.
Yes, present.
All five are present. Thank you.
Number 2 is the February 2018 Airport Commission meeting minutes approval. Are there any changes or additions to the minutes that anyone has?
I had noticed a couple of changes here. I don't have my copy, but
Line 14.
thank you. Yeah, line 14, where it says Ashback Dahlbeck motion to approve. I thought it doesn't say anything after that other than it passed 3-0. I thought it should include the January, to approve January minutes. And then there was a correction I had on, do you remember that line number, John?
I don't remember the line number, but.
Oh, here it is, line 76.
There we go. Thank you.
The word what was misspelled. So,
Line 76, the word "what" is misspelled.
Any other corrections or additions to the meeting minutes of last month? A motion to approve?
I'll make a motion to approve with the changes I proposed.
Is there a second?
I will second it.
Seconded by Commissioner Dahlbeck. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved.
Thank you.
Number 3 on the agenda this evening is Bolton and Mink, and I believe they are not here this evening, but the city manager has their report.
Yeah, chair members of the commission, Silas is not able to be present tonight, but he did forward me an update for tonight's meeting. Looks on the obstruction lighting project, the update is light poles are not penetrations to the existing runway 31 approach. MnDOT has concurred obstruction lights are not required, and then MnDOT does recommend installing for safety purposes, and the city could erect red solar obstruction light or something equivalent, is what he updated on that one. The approach procedure safety. To obtain GPS approaches, the city needs to submit a request to the FAA for each runway end and approach desired. Bolton and Mink has submitted a request to the FAA to begin the process on the city's behalf. So it looks like that project has been submitted and begun. The infield drainage improvements, which is the infield area northwest of taxiway A2 between runway 13 and 31, and taxiway A is not infiltrating surface discharge or surface drainage. Surface drainage presently ponds in the area. A submitted request for the project has been submitted to MnDOT to see if they'd cost participate in the project. And as of today, we have not heard back whether or not they're going to cost participate or not. So that one is still being considered by MnDOT. And the final request that he sent, or final update that Silas sent over, was the request to assist with preliminary design of proposed FBO hangars, which is on the agenda for tonight with the Chris Olson update. Bolton and Mink was contacted by Chris Olson to assist with the preliminary design of the proposed hangar. I actually submitted a build-back agreement to Chris Olson that would have authorized if Bolton and Mink wanted to perform that work, since they'd be responsible for the fees for having our engineering firm do that work. They, in the interim, did not end up going with Bolton and Mink to do that initial design site or concept site plan work they had before you. They ended up using their own consultant for that. So that's the latest update I have from Silas on the engineering front.
Is that a question, Mr. Schmidt?
No.
Okay. Any comments or questions from the commission on that report? No? All right. The agenda, I'm going to throw the agenda a little out of order because some of the next items on the agenda, I know there's people here in the audience that want to speak on, and so we're going to jump to the others for the floor for any individuals who want to speak on any of those items before we bring them to the commission. So if anyone wants to speak on any of those items or any item, we will jump to number 12 and then come back to number 4 after that. Anyone want to speak on the issue of the hangar lease rates, the airport classification use? No.
I'm Sam Husnick, and I serve on the Forest Lake Airport, or Forest Lake City Council. On item number 4, in the hangar use compliance with the state and whatever, the main thing is, well, we have to need to talk about what is the policy. Define the policy of what's going on. And as far as I'm concerned, there's some things that need to be addressed, they need to be fixed. And so what is the policy?
Thank you, Mr. Husnick. Mr. Shipp?
The city of Forest Lake continues to be in violation of the ground lease contracts at the airport. You're charging us for part of the runway paving costs. It's improper. It's outside of the contracts. It needs to be fixed. In addition, the language is very clear that it's governed by the local CPI, that all of it needs to be respected.
Thank you. Anyone else on any of the items?
Mr. Chair, my name is Adam Grabovi. I'm a citizen of Forest Lake.
Sorry, I didn't catch the last name.
Grabovi.
Grabovi, thank you.
Thank you for hearing this tonight, as well as what you're going to be dealing with as far as procedure and policy. After reviewing some of your prior meetings and minutes, and I know you're a brand new chairman, I appreciate you being here. I want to compliment you for readdressing this. This was addressed in 2016, and now it's being readdressed 2018. Nothing done in between. I can say that through the documents. And what I'd like to caution right now, this whole commission, and let the secretary know
Yes, sir.
that documents on the city website are disappearing. Very important that we keep our documents all the way back from the beginning. Please take note of this. I accessed the website about a week ago. Now the documents are gone. So, and I don't want to take a lot of your time, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention. And thank you for readdressing it. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Just on the website, can you speak to me directly on that? Because I would want to know what documents you're referencing, just because the city administers are you talking the city's website or the commission's website?
City's website.
Yeah.
And the commission website.
Email me, we'll figure that out, because nothing should have been deleted as far as I'm aware of. But if
Like I said, I didn't know if they were deleted, sir.
Sure.
I'm just saying.
nope,
they're not there.
yeah, let me know offline. We'll get that figured out for you. Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Grabovi. Is there anyone else who would like to speak on any of the items on the agenda, please?
Hi, Jim Schultz. I'm concerned that you've made this appearance to be an arbitrary switch in the agenda. My concern is if through discussion tonight you decide to double the rent on my hangar, I'm not allowed to speak to it until a month from now. So I just am a little concerned about taking it out of this because I might have a comment after I hear all the rest of the views this evening.
Understood, Mr. Schmidt. Understood. Anyone else like to speak on any of the items? Okay, with that, we will move to agenda item number 4, which is the aeronautical use guidelines. And this agenda item arose after some concerns were raised at the end of last meeting regarding usage of hangars at the airport. After this meeting, and City Manager, you can correct me if I'm at any points on this, but after the meeting, you and I met and we discussed how the city would go about enforcing such these use guidelines that are in existence or need to be in existence. And one of the specific things you brought to my attention was that the city right now does not have a definition of aeronautical use in order to be able to enforce it. Is that correct? Am I?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like from the city's perspective of enforcement, I mean, we'd have to be forced to make the interpretation. You know, we don't have clear defined guidelines from the Airport Commission or the council as to what these what aeronautical use actually, I mean, the percentage of aeronautical use that would meet, and aeronautical use is pretty clear, it's a plane in there or something related to flying, correct? But the percentages as to where if you're in violation or not in violation, that's where kind of the point where we'd have a tough time doing an enforcement action. In the interim, I did reach out to Silas and say, is there any policies or any type of thing from the FAA or any other organization that defines, aeronautical use on a hangar basis, because we're not the only airport that probably would face this issue.
Right.
He did forward me the FAA guidelines. They're on my desk. I haven't gone through them line by line, but he did caution. He said the FAA keeps these pretty vague as well. So there's not a lot, they're not crystal clear where if it's, demarked at 48.5% use of aeronautical, that meets the classification. He said there's a little bit of gray area in the FAA requirements. So basically what the city would be looking for is some recommendations to say, how do we, if there's a perceived violation of, a hangar not being aeronautical use, we need to know what we're kind of going out there to look for. Now, granted, we can look for a plane, but if, you have, part of a plane, does that meet it? I mean, just some kind of general guidelines so we have something to basically go back and execute an enforcement action if needed.
And just to understand how an enforcement action in general takes place, I mean, if someone speaks here at the microphone on an evening, does that initiate an action, or do you need something in writing, and can it be emailed? Does someone have to write a letter and
I mean,
deliver
I would
it?
say it's probably on a case-by-case basis. I don't want to put, the procedure in place to actually how we kind of go down that. I mean, in general, the city as a whole, in terms of most code enforcement, which you could probably kind of run that similar track with, this would be kind of similar to how we do other code enforcements, is that we don't proactively go out and do code enforcement at this point, where we basically are complaint-based at this point. So we receive a complaint, an anonymous complaint that comes in for a code violation. We then follow up to take a look at, are they in violation of the ordinance that we have? And if we are, we issue the corrective action, and they can correct it and kind of, close out that case. But we don't proactively go out and, as a matter of practice, look for these actively.
Right, someone would have to bring that to your attention.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to speak to how this would happen, because this is a little bit different of a situation, but that's how we've handled other complaint-based, potential code violations on the city level for zoning code violations.
And separately from the aeronautical activity definition that the city needs some guidelines on, what is the usage respect to commercial for the private hangars, not for the commercial hangars such as the skydiving operation or Lot 1 that we're talking about that came before us last week, but for the private hangars, what is the allowable use with respect to commercial use in general?
Again, at this point, I don't have that, I'd be making an estimated guess at this point. I don't have that, data in front of me.
Okay, so you don't know if that's an acceptable use or a
I
non-acceptable use?
have to go through and do the full analysis, I'm kind of coming into this with, out that background, so I could definitely get up to speed on that and bring it, but again,
I think that'd be good to know, because I know in with the MAC reliever airports, they have completely separate lease contracts for commercial leases versus private leases. And that's why I'm curious if the city and if the state, who is now very much involved in our airport, has guidelines to that effect.
And that's, again, I'd be working with Silas on some of that, he has more of an experience in terms of like how other airports handle it, from some recommendations, and that's kind of, this is just a starting point, for us. This isn't going to get resolved at this point.
No, clearly.
This evening. We just need to kind of get a starting point for this discussion to happen, so we could, because I know there's been some concern that if you're not have enough aeronautical use, you got a potential, and you could lose, potentially MnDOT funding is what I've heard. So we just want to make sure that we're maintaining all of that compliance issues moving forward, so we can say if MnDOT comes to us and says, well, these airport hangars they're not meeting the aeronautical use guidelines, we can say, no, here's our guidelines, and yes, they are, no, they're not. So, again, it's a starting point for that discussion to happen and to get that policy developed.
Right. I think that is the primary concern is the MnDOT's understanding of and the risk we run
Correct.
with MnDOT because they are such a big part of our funding. Do any commission members have any comments, or maybe we'll start at Mr. Ashbeck? Do you have?
I took a look at the leases, and there's some clarity in the leases of what some of the uses are. And then I did take a look at the airport, what is it called? The airport guidelines that was put together early on with the south building area, and it has some information in there too. I think we could take. I think we could start with those items and maybe start again. Let me clarify. Start with the lease the leases that we have, the airport guidelines that we have, and then look at the FAA, with the FAA guidelines as well.
You mentioned leases plural. How many different leases are there out there?
Well, there's the original lease that several of the hangar owners are on, and then there's, I don't know how many versions there are. I know that each person that has a lot lease has a lease. I've never looked at individual leases to see how many things vary, but if I had to guess, I would guess that there's the original lease that the early entrants of people that leased lots are on, and then there's the current lease, which I would imagine there's, 6 to 9 leases on that as well. But they can all vary depending on, those leases could have some language variances. For instance, the skydive hangar had some language variances in it. I think, what other language variances? I have an addendum to my lease, the original lease, because of the use that I had asked for early on, so.
I ask that because I know there are at least 2 different, and I'm only speaking to the private hangar leases, not the commercial leases. I understand that Skydive would have a different, and any commercial would have a different lease and a different tax structure. But with respect to the private hangars, I know of at least 2 different leases, and I do know that in one of the leases, they do give more of a definition of aeronautical use than the other. And like I say, we have a starting point, and we'll work through MnDOT and a few other sources. And if anyone out there is familiar with other airports, small airports that have gone through this, we should not be having to reinvent the wheel here. This has obviously been done before and has been an issue before other airports. But so that's what we're just looking to do, is get that definition well-defined or better defined so that the city has the means to enforce these things.
Mr. Chair, should we set a workshop that would allow the Airport Commission to at least take a look at the lease examples and the FAA guidelines, or?
That's, what do you propose for a workshop? I don't know how that's typically done with, this is my first
Yeah, from a
evening as
staff
chairman.
perspective, I mean, that, we would need some time to compile all that data. I mean, just to make sure we get everything, I mean, like, and I want to have a couple of conversations with Silas, I mean, see if he's available to it as well, because he has experienced this with other airports. He'd be an ability to add some knowledge to that conversation that I think is critical.
So, excuse me, an alternative could be that you get a chance to look, or someone looks at the leases that we have to see the similarities of uses, plus the documents we mentioned, and hear back from Silas.
I agree. I think that's a good way to go for the next meeting, to come in and hopefully we'll have some sources, and maybe it'll be too much information that we can start narrowing down at that point.
Yeah, I'll touch base with Silas. I know he's out of the office this week. I'll just confirm with him that this works with his schedule, because again, I want him to kind of, probably take the analysis work that's outside of the lease work and then maybe bring that together. Then we try to marry that up with the current lease language versus, starting points there.
Right.
If it's going to be, I don't know what the timeline is for what his workload is, so it may not be at the next meeting. We'll try to shoot for the next meeting, but.
Understood. This is not going to be a fast process, and by bringing it up now, it gives the public time to chime in as well, because it's an important thing going forward. If we can resolve it by the end of the summer, that'd be great. If we can have a definition by then, that'd be fantastic.
I will reach out to Silas and get it on his work plan.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions on that agenda item before we move on? No? All right, agenda item number 5, the PAPPs, the progress on the PAPPs.
Mr. Chair, I heard from Lindsay at SEH today, and she said that MnDOT Aeronautics was out last week to do some additional replacement of parts and checking the operation of the PAPPs, and as far as she knows, the MnDOT Aeronautics is contacting FAA to get a flight check scheduled for the PAPPs so they can be turned on. So.
Okay. Any other comments on that? Anything else? No? The hangar lease rate adjustment decision. Now, this showed up on the agenda when we received the agenda a week ago, and just this morning, I know the city manager forwarded There was one document that was forwarded, and I have it here. It's the Statement of Revenues, Expenditures, and Changes in Fund Balance. Would the city manager, would you like to speak to that document and with respect to this item?
Yeah, basically, that's just I asked yesterday from the finance director to give just basically an analysis or just a look at where the 2018, I don't have it in front of me, the fund balance of the airport fund, which is Airport Fund 250. And what you see is you have the 2016 actuals on the left-hand side of the document. You have what was budgeted originally in 2017, and the reestimate midway, and then the budget that's proposed for 18. Basically, for 18, you have total revenues projected at 118,541. You have total expenditures budgeted at 126,750. So you're currently running a deficit of 8209 from revenues to expenditures for 2018. Part of that is there's a capital outlay cost of $15,000, which goes towards the purchase of a mower for mowing out at the airport. There's also the contractual $25,000, which is the Bolton and Mink fees that are on there. But that's just basically this is more of a guideline to show where you guys are from revenues over expenses currently as you guys consider lease revenues, because lease revenues are a part of your budget. So that's why that was included this morning.
This came out about a year ago. It's pretty close to the same amount. And then there was talk about getting rid of this $85,000 debacle that we have on the leases that isn't supposed to be there. It isn't in our leases.
Referencing the runway rent as it's stated
Right.
on the,
And
right.
so that was always said, well, this would take care of it, and there'd still be enough fund in there for the reserve that they needed, and nothing's happened. Nobody seems to do anything on it.
So if I could offer a point of clarity on there, if you look in 2016, you have an $80,000 transfer to general fund, which is half of that 150 that was the airport, airports buying on the paving project. In 2018, so you have in 17 and 18, you have $17,000 that's being allocated towards pavement management reserve, which is Bolton and Mink projected out what the cost of a resurfacing of the new paved runway would be, and I can't remember how many years out it would be. And then we broke that down to say every year you got to put $17,000 a year away. So when the resurfacing needs to happen, the fund balance will be there to basically pay for that resurfacing to happen. In terms of budget in general, you want to always maintain about 50% fund balance to cover expenses moving forward. So if you look at this, you have total expenditures of $126,750. So you want to keep a ballpark around $60,000 in fund balance, so you're not in jeopardy of going below the part where you can't pay your bills in subsequent years. So if you back out your $17,000 from the past 2 years and you split your expenditures, you're barely at that 50% threshold. So it's not recommended at this point to make a transfer to pay off that remaining. I don't have the exact number what's remaining on the paving, the paving project. I think it's somewhere in the ballpark of like mid-50s, like 55, 58,000. The fund balance is not healthy enough to basically support that. A couple other impacts that you potentially have coming forward is that ag rent could potentially go down, in future years. So, the fund balance is there. However, you make a big withdrawal at this point, you're basically on pretty shaky financial footings moving forward. So at this point, I wouldn't recommend making a large transfer over to take care of that fund balance, just because you're setting it up where if another project comes down the road, you're not going to have the fund balance to take care of it. Your paving, your resurfacing project, when that comes due, which is a maintenance project, you're on track right now to have the fund balance to take care of that down the road. If you have a very good 18 and the revenues way exceed projections here, you could have the discussion point. You want to take some of that excess revenues and pay down that, and that discussion point could happen. Just looking at these numbers right now, I just don't think there's enough in the fund balance to basically get you on firm financial footings moving forward if you make a big deposit or pay down that current balance that's owed to the general fund for the remainder of the paving project.
What if you took a portion of that fund balance and paid down on?
And I haven't crunched the numbers. I haven't got down to the point where you're looking at where are you at with the threshold. Just at the first cut, when you start looking at the analysis back of the napkin math, is that even if you make a potential portion cut of that at this point, you're still getting really close to that fund balance at 50% threshold. And you're just kind of getting into that, you're getting really close. The other issue becomes if you prepay it down, you know, I mean, you have a 280 on track to get that paid off at a certain time frame. How do you back pay all that? I mean, it's possible, you know. However, the fund balance at this point, I think your better bet is to grow your fund balance up to a level where, you know, you have your, you know, your kind of your long range maintenance projects paid for, you know, you're projecting towards that. Then if you get excess up to the point when the balance gets to a certain point, then you can just pay off the remainder. I think you're just a little bit away from that at this point. You know, again, is it possible? It is. However, I caution against that just because I think your fund balance would be too low to sustain operations.
And in the original lease, it talks about the airport commission is responsible to review and recommend, that's not the exact language, changes in lease rates on the even years in March. Does that mean that's the only time the airport commission can recommend changes?
I mean, the recommended change, so what you're actually discussing tonight, you know, as far as I understand it, would be, you know, the hangar rent here, which is the
lease rates?
the $30,000 in 2018 budget. So that's your basic budget there. So that's what's being considered tonight, you know. So you gotta look at, you know, do you want to make an adjustment to your base rent rate to kind of help this? Because right now, I mean, you're dipping into fund balance this year to cover your operations.
Your point is okay. One of the questions I had for clarification is the hangar, the lot lease, which I think is identified as hangar rent, I guess, 30,000. That's the hangar rentals as well as the lot leases, but doesn't include the 280 per lot.
The 280 is not included on this balance.
Not
The
in the
280
balance.
pays directly to the general fund. I do know that for sure. I got clarification. In terms of like what you're looking at, the breakdown in there, I can't speak 100% to that because I just got this compiled yesterday from the finance director and I didn't, you know, get into the level of detail.
I did work with a few numbers to see, it seemed reasonable that it did not include the 280, but it did include a rent for hangars, 5 hangars. And
The 280 is not on here just in the fact that goes directly to the general fund, which is not reflective in this fund balance since it's not in the fund 250. It goes directly to the general fund.
I apologize, but this all came to me this morning, so this was all a very short notice on having these numbers in front of me, and in reading the leases, there's language I know in the one lease with reference to the CPI, and that the rent is based on a maximum of the CPI, and that's what's deemed reasonable. And this goes back to the whole discussion of the runway rent that was added, because that when you bring that in, that exceeds that CPI number, and therefore it no longer meets the definition of reasonable. I guess I would like to have a better handle on the CPI numbers as they fall, and how that, let's say this runway tax, or this runway, I call it a tax, the runway rent did not exist, where would the CPI number fall in for our discussion? And then in the meantime, I would like something from the city attorney to address the runway rent. The runway rent, and given the language in the lease that readjust, I mean, it's very specific to the effect that readjustment shall be reasonable and the CPI shall be considered reasonable, the justification for the runway rent addition that was made, because
And I can go back. There was an attorney recommendation based on that. I wasn't a part of that. I mean, I can go back and get those documents. But what's being considered tonight is outside of that. I mean, so you have two separate issues here. You have the runway, the 280 goes to the general fund. That's not including what's being discussed tonight. You're just looking at your base lease rate adjustments.
but that's part of your rent, though. Rent is rent.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I can get clarification from the city attorney. I mean, I wasn't a part of those conversations. I mean, I can ask her for a recommendation on it. However, basically, it's, you know, base rent, what do you want to do with your base rent? What percentage increase or not increase it are you looking at, which covers your operations here?
Chairman?
Yes.
Not to muddy the waters further, but also we're hanging out there is the mitigation on the runway itself.
Yes, that's right.
And we don't have those numbers yet as to how much the city may or may not owe once that is settled. So, and the bigger question is, if it should come out in a negative, where's the money coming from?
So should we table this discussion on this for at least,
Dan, can you
Till
give us,
April?
excuse me, Dan, can you give us some insight as to when we might get an answer
On,
on the settlement?
at this point, I have not, I mean, I've spoken with the attorney, I just don't have an update in terms of timeline on that. That's still to be determined at this point. We're still kind of in a holding pattern, you know, in terms of when that gets settled out. He's kind of assessing what the next options are, so I don't have any defined timeline as to when we would know that. I mean, it's still very much a fluid situation, and it could, you know, change depending upon, you know, both parties involved in this at this point. So I can't say we're a month out, we're 6 weeks out, we're 6 months out. I just don't have a defined timeline at this point.
and commission members have any thoughts on direction tonight on this?
Well, I thought we had a deadline on to do this lease thing.
Well, the one group of leases has the month of March meeting on even years language in it. We could certainly table this for April to learn, so the chair could work with Dan and learn, you know, and for Dan to look for the definition of the attorney, you know, the attorney's letter regarding the lease. We could do that. I'm not quite sure, Dan, in the, I haven't looked at the fee schedule lately to see how the square footage rate is versus the 280 and how they define that. There's two separate line items, I know that, but.
Yeah, I don't have that, I mean, I can
And
do
I
it.
think it might be best to see what the attorney letter had to say before we start getting into making decisions of one, because when you pay the rent, it's all on one invoice to the city. So my recommendation is that we table this for April and get some clarifications from the attorney.
Is there a second to table it?
We've been talking about this for over a couple of years now, and nothing ever gets done. The leases were violated. Nobody has shown me in my lease how that $280 even applies. The people that applied it, by their own admission, said that, well, don't worry about it because they can't collect it anyway because it's not on your lease. And nobody will address the thing. It just keeps going. So where is it on my lease that I owe that money?
Well, and again, I wasn't a part of the conversations,
Well, but
there
the
wa-
lease is still there.
No, right, and I'm not saying it's not. However, you know, the last I heard on this was that the city attorney said the option at this point for proving is to take it to arbitration. That is the
I
mechanism.
don't have anything to arbitrate. I got the lease right there. Read the thing. It's black and white.
Right.
You can't go violate a lease and then say, I got to arbitrate it.
But I mean, again, I have a city attorney at the time whose recommendation was we are okay to do this. You have a disagreement there, that's when arbitration comes into play. You take it to an arbitrator, both cases get presented, and they make the decision.
Well,
I mean, I'm just saying that's the mechanism at this point. You know,
But when everybody that was involved here knows it was wrong, and nobody will admit it, that just bites me. Because when we went into that thing, the people said, well, they can't collect it anyway. It's not in our lease. And now nobody can find that, nobody can live up to it, and they just keep going around and around about it.
And again, I wasn't a part of that conversation.
I know you weren't there. I'm not,
No.
I'm
No,
saying
and-
what happened.
No, right, and I appreciate
I've asked
that.
for that explanation for 2 years now, and I still don't have it. So if they got a charge that's legitimate, why can't they tell me where it is in my lease? They can't, because it's not there.
I can go back to the city attorney and dig up all that. I mean, I can pull those records of what we have, where we got to where we are as the point. That's all I can do at this point. Because like I said, I wasn't in the meetings for those rooms. I don't have the full history behind me, so I can't speak to, you know, how we got to where we are. You know, I had a quick conversation with the city attorney to say, what is the mechanism for remedy on this? And the recommendation I got was arbitration, is what I was told. That's
There's a lot of people in this room that can speak to it, and they know where the truth lies, and nobody wants to admit it and correct it.
All I'm saying is I have an attorney at the time that said we are okay to do this. That's why it happened. I wasn't a part of those conversations though. I'm just saying I'm willing to dig that up and try to find that information for it and bring it, and have a discussion. But again, end of the day is basically if there's a disagreement in how that lease gets administered, that's where arbitration comes in. That's what it's there for. I mean, that's the purpose of it.
From what you just mentioned here, and again, this is my second meeting, you mentioned that the attorney now, so the city attorney now is different than the city attorney?
It's the same firm, just a different, there was a switch in an attorney, and I have not had a chance to sit down and visit this whole thing at length with the current city attorney. This is all kind of when we had, the previous one was there.
So Dan, really, what we're talking about is the base hangar lease discussion tonight,
At this point,
to
correct.
clarify that. And at this point in time, the only reason to change that, I mean, we seem to be on track with our financials.
Correct, you're running a deficit this year, maybe 200, but, there's a couple of one-off purchases that are on there as well. But yeah, you're close.
So, I mean, if we did nothing with the lease at this point, would have no effect on the rate.
Yeah, but you also got to plan for it for 2 years too. That's the other thing. You're setting lease terms for 2 years, so you have to project out what you're looking at doing in fiscal year 19, as well. So if you're, because that's one of your revenues is lease rent, or is the lease payments that come forward. So
We missed doing it for 5 or 6 or 7 years. And the last time we changed it to 11 cents, it was way over the CPI number. If you go back year by year by year since the lease started, we would be owing $10.61 cents per square foot instead of the 11 that we're paying today. And we raised it to 11 knowing it was high, but we wanted to show good faith that the airport was going to get paid. And instead, it all goes to pot.
The point of clarification, if I may, I had a motion to table. Does a motion to table require a second? I can't remember.
yeah, it does. There's no
require a
discussion after it's.
And then it's non-debatable.
Yeah, it's non-debatable, then you vote on it,
Okay.
and then.
So there's a motion on the floor.
table.
Maybe there isn't a second to table, which is fine, but we have a motion on the floor and we haven't had a second, so.
I was going to mention the same thing. I don't hear a second.
The motion was to table this discussion until April.
As chairman, may I second the motion? I will second the motion to table it. I feel I need more information on this and table it till the April meeting. Do we take a vote on the tabling now?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor of tabling, say aye.
Aye.
No?
This was 3, all against,
No.
No.
Thank you.
2 noes. So noted, and it will be tabled till next meeting. Item number 7 on the agenda, airport use classification. This is on the agenda. A number of questions have been raised regarding the need for bathrooms being required in hangars in the private hangars as they currently are. And the city's looking for direction on this from the Airport Commission, both with respect to the existing group of hangars as well as, I don't know if we have a board or a screen, but what is considered phase 2, the next group of hangars that will be opened up and for lease. And I don't think anyone in the public spoke about it earlier in the evening. I kind of thought there would be after I've talked with some hangar owners as well as some aircraft owners. So I'll open it up to the commission. Any commissioners have any thoughts on this right now?
Well, currently, we've got, everything that's being built out there now is been dug for sewer.
Correct.
Except yours, John, I believe?
What?
Yours has not been dug for sewer?
No, mine has the line in.
Oh, yours is dug up to the building?
No, Sam installed the hose line in for the sewer.
So everybody, I guess. the
In
only thing-
phase one, in that area, I think is,
Everybody will have a bathroom at this point. So what we'd be talking about, anything in the future here. Okay.
well, everyone has the water to their lot in phase one. You could stub it in and not install a bathroom. I suppose there's 4 or 5 hangars not constructed yet. So it would fall into that category if someone chose not to have a bathroom that has the water there. And then the next thing would be if there is agreement that bathrooms should not be required, the next question is, do we have the city bring in the water and sewer to those other lots, in which case those lessees would have to pay the infrastructure fee whether they install a
Right.
bathroom or not.
So that was my question, is that if they choose not to have utilities in there, do they still pay the infrastructure?
They would still, if we were to have them put the infrastructure in, they would have to pay that fee, which would seem counterproductive to the idea that we're trying to keep hangars low cost by not requiring the bathrooms. But I think that's in the discussions I've had, I haven't come across anyone that was adamant about the need for hangars in the bathrooms. Or, excuse me, bathrooms in the hangars. But bathrooms in the hangars. But
Quite often, the other happens,
the
too.
question is kind of up in the air as to whether or not the infrastructure shall be put in on the phase 2. Because if you don't put it in, it's almost impossible then later on if someone were to want a bathroom in those hangars. So, yes,
Mr.
Commissioner.
Chair, a couple of things. Number one is the infrastructure fee was not only for utilities, but it was also for the money that the city had to put forth towards building the taxi lanes and getting the land prepped for the hangars and things like that.
True.
On top of the utilities. So no matter what goes in there, there should be an infrastructure fee.
Yes.
Number one. Number two, I do think that knowing that the idea is to convert that T-hanger area to, just regular land leases like the rest of us have, that it behooves to have utilities there for people. If they choose not to hook up at this time, that's their prerogative. I think they still need to pay the infrastructure fee. Lastly, doggone it. I lost it. I had one other point, but sorry, it doesn't come to me right now.
Okay. And it is understood gas and electric would still go to all these lots. It's just the sewer this water and sewer, which is a very expensive item to bring to these lots if we chose not to bring it.
Okay, sorry.
Right.
So the other item that I had on my mind when I was looking at the notes from the last meeting and the email that John Schmidt had with the state, it wasn't about a bathroom and a hangar, it's about occupancy of the hangar. And if the state deems that a hangar is going to be occupied, that's one of the things that says a bathroom is needed. But Chad.
And the building official, Chad Payment's
Oh.
here to provide some clarification on to the exact kind of nuance of what's being discussed.
I spoke to Paul Heimkes at the state as well, and him and I had a conversation where, as I wrote in my memo, that the building code states that without a classification of airport hangars in the code table that's provided, it's up to a determination of the building official. So my determination was to keep it consistent with the previous building official, who made a determination that bathrooms were required in these types of buildings. I would suggest to keep it consistent through phase 1. So I guess at this point, I would look as a suggestion on how you want to proceed with including them in buildings or not. And then I will follow that direction.
I think Ed had a question.
Yeah, I don't want to, my question was prior to his comment. My question was, as far as the infrastructure, I agree with Mr. Ashbeck. And speaking as a city rep, I would wholly think that because city would be putting in infrastructure and there's more to the infrastructure than just a the water and sewer. It's the grading, the things that he talked about. So I definitely think if we have phase 2, that would be included in the lease, that you pay for that infrastructure. Whether or not you put a bathroom in is up to you.
So you think the water and sewer?
Water,
would be
sewer,
put
and all
in?
that should be.
Put in.
Because you can't put it in later. I
Right,
mean,
right, that's the thing.
And I just think you're going to do it all at once. You're not going to skip around, well, let's do this one, not do that one.
Right. Any other comments?
Then the only other comment I'd have, and I agree with him, to be consistent on phase 1, I would think you'd complete them all out as it was directed for phase 1. And you're almost at 100% build out already.
Correct.
Do we need to define phase 2?
Well,
We talked about it being the area where the T-hanger was going to be, but is it more than that?
well, it's the group of next hangars and the T hangars. So I don't know how many hangars are in that.
So
Right.
so phase 2 is really what was presented by Silas at a previous meeting, showing that the current lot for T-hangers will become lot leases, and then the next
I guess
row
that's
over is
the map I
T-hangers.
saw, yes.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Well, this should also, make a difference on a T-hanger where we have one bathroom in that thing, or each one has bathrooms, or
It wouldn't
Or
need
no
any.
bathrooms.
Or no bathrooms. Which, one of the driving forces behind having T hangars is lowering the cost of hangars for individuals and keeping, or removing the need for having to install a bathroom there, which would then require heating the unit all the time as well. That would significantly reduce the cost and make it more economically feasible. Anyone want to make a motion in any direction?
Well, I got some questions yet. We got this new proposal here that you sent with these 4 hangars that are being built.
Okay.
How would those, there's one that has the sewer and water, but the other ones don't. Would they be forced to put them in, or would they put it in themselves, or what's that lease going to say?
That at this point, the lot 6 would be under the current, they've already paid the infrastructure fee for lot 6, so they'd be under the phase 1. The lot 1 that's being discussed tonight has not paid the infrastructure, the fee for the utilities because they're not on lot 1 at this point. So that would still need to be, if they're brought out, would be a different, that's to be negotiated down the road.
I understand they're waiting for their lease from the city. And
Right.
I think that's one of their concerns is,
And that lot 1, we're gonna, because that just came in this morning, we're gonna talk about that on the agenda. We're gonna add it to the agenda right after
Okay.
this item. So we'll talk specifically to lot 1 and their plans going forward in a minute.
So you're looking for a motion?
I think we could break the motion into the 2 phases. There could be a motion for phase 1, that phase 1 shall be required to have bathrooms, which falls in line exactly with the way they've been built out to date. And that we recommend to the Forest Lake City Council. This is what I see. And then the second motion would be with respect to phase 2, in that bathrooms would not be required in those hangars, but the city would install the water and sewer, and therefore the lessees would be, the first lessees would be responsible for paying the corresponding infrastructure fee.
Correct.
For those.
Sounds like a motion.
It could be, I don't want to hog the microphone all
Well,
night,
it's-
so,
I'll give it a try.
go for it.
So, okay, so the motion will be that phase 1 will continue to have the requirement of bathrooms as it has in the past for the remaining lots to be built out. In phase 2, the lot lessees will have an option for unoccupied hangars to not be required to have a bathroom.
Yet the infrastructure, the full infrastructure
Thank you.
will be
And I'll
installed,
continue.
including water and
The infrastructure fees
sewer.
are still applicable, and the utilities will still be installed to the and will still be installed per lot. Yep.
And I will second that.
And a second.
Hold on just 1 second. I'm going to get the wording right, and I'm going to check the wording to make sure we got it right. Please, thank you for your patience. Can't type.
It
Hold
should
on.
always start with a motion to recommend to the city council. if
Yes,
you'd
sir.
like.
Yeah, thank you. I'll accept that. Thank you.
The motion is to recommend to the city council that Phase 1 hangars, all Phase 1 hangars, shall be required to have bathrooms, as has been done in the past. Also, it is recommended to the council that Phase 2 lessees will have the option for not having bathrooms, but the city will install water and sewer access, and first lessees will be responsible for paying the associated infrastructure fee. That's what I have right now.
And I'm going to look at Chad with this because I didn't hear unoccupied, and
I'm sorry, then I will,
and I think that's imperative,
Option
right?
for-
I mean, my understanding is the state, when for the information that I looked at and heard and talked with the state, is they made a differentiation between occupied and unoccupied.
they made a differentiation between occupied and unoccupied buildings, whether they're hangars or anything like
Correct,
that. Yeah,
and
yeah.
unoccupied did not require a bathroom.
Correct, yep,
But
yep.
if
So I'll
they-
include the word unoccupied in there. I'm going to reread it if you don't mind. Is that okay, Mr. Chair?
Please.
Is the hangar though unoccupied?
It is not a living structure. You don't live in it, so then it's not required. Phase 1 hangars shall be required to have bathrooms. Recommended to the council, Phase 2 lessees will have the option for not having bathrooms in unoccupied hangars, but the city will install water and sewer access, and the first lessees would be responsible for paying the associated infrastructure fee. I can read that again if you'd like.
If you could.
Yes, absolutely. Recommended to City Council that Phase 1 hangars shall be required to have bathrooms. Recommended that Phase 2 hangars, lessees will have the option for not having bathrooms in unoccupied hangars, but the city will install water and sewer access, and the first lessees would be responsible for paying the associated infrastructure fee.
Commissioner Dahlbeck, do you want to
I
second
can
that?
change that to anything you want.
I think does that sound?
Providing I
like
agree.
But providing, yes, providing that the person who made the motion agrees. Thank you.
Are you in agreement, Rick?
Yeah, I'm in agreement.
And I will second that.
Commissioner Dahlbeck seconds it. All in favor? Aye.
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 All opposed? No one's opposed. Okay. Item 8, which is not on the agenda, that kind of came with the email this morning from the city manager, and that is a discussion, or just a continuation of the discussion of lot number 1, the proposed commercial operation over adjacent to the gas station at the airport. And I think the city manager was going to speak to this.
Yeah, I can just show you the quick update. At the last meeting, the applicant came forward and presented kind of a concept idea of what they're hoping to do on Lot 1, which I don't have the exact specs in front of me, but it was designed up, I want to say it was like, was it 120 by 180? Do you remember the size of that lot?
120 by 80. It's 120 deep, and it's 80 wide.
Yep, yeah, so he wanted, basically what the applicant did was they wanted to basically be able to adjust that lot size to allow for 3 buildings to be placed on there to better fit their proposed use of that lot. What they presented, what they sent over was this engineered drawing that kind of shows their proposed layout. You can see they have the 3 buildings here. They also have lot 6 under lease at this point, and they're showing their lot 6 build-out, which looks like it's a pretty standard hangar, as, you know, that would match the rest of them that are out there. The main thing for consideration tonight is, like, this is just, again, a concept plan that was submitted over as a starting point to say, this is what we want to do potentially with lot 1. We want to readjust the size here to, it looks like, just trying to say 180, 240 by, what's the length on that?
Looks like 80 by 80 on the end and
Correct.
120 by 80 in the center.
Yeah, so I mean, but they're looking at the whole, you know, package deal. And so part of what this happens, this has some impact on how that road behind it would get laid out. If you kick back 120, that road can no longer go straight. It has to have this little bit of a jog in here. Just kind of looking for, again, for some initial feedback on this, because if the airport commission is okay with this proposed layout, we'd have to take it back and then start doing the engineering behind it to actually look at costing out the utility runs, costing out, looking at, depending upon the use, would they require additional parking? That's one question that came up, was depending upon if it's a, simple use, if it's a flight school or whatever that is, there may be additional parking requirements that's there. We're just kind of looking back to get those details figured out, because there is some potential impact to future layouts, based on this lot line adjustment. There's also been some potential, the current tax lane does not go all the way in front of this furthest building here. So we have to figure out, how do we need to expand that? Would we need to expand that to get their, access to that building for them? So again, at this point, it's just basically a concept. We're just looking for some initial feedback. If you guys are okay with this, we'll take this back and have them start costing out, from a utility perspective, what this would cost, from a site prep perspective, what that would cost, so they can start taking that back to, put that into their operational finances.
I know my primary questions when I first saw this was parking for their employees, as well as people coming to their facility, and that the only parking there appears to be is right behind the gas station there. And I don't know, maybe that can be expanded over. I can't remember the lot because there's a lot of snow there now. But that's something I think that absolutely needs to be addressed.
Dan, where are we with the providing sewer and water to that?
Sewer and water, the closest hookup at this point, and again, this is an approximation, is about where the circle is here. Actually, I'll take that back. It's back, where's the arrival departure building? Right here. It's at this corner here, where you see, it's in this area right here. So I had an initial conversation with the city engineer. What would be okay for this use is a private service line extension out there. And that's what, because we don't have any infrastructure in this section of the airport. Basically, it stops at the arrival departure building. When we looked at this before, we didn't have any dimensions for where we're going to run these from. It was just kind of an approximation. So we couldn't get a hard number behind what the actual utility improvements were going to be, because at this point, if you're looking at, if you adjust where that line goes 50 feet, that can significantly impact the price of, running piping. So based on this, and again, on a layout perspective, we'd have to go back then and say, okay, the layout looks okay. Now we're going to really measure out where the utilities are, how much that would cost, what that utility improvement would be. But at this point, the city engineer was fairly confident it would be served with just a private line, both water and sewer would be able to serve these three buildings.
And how does the lease laid out for that? Is that just the square footage of the buildings, or that lot was never that big?
Yeah, so there's a current, they have a current lease. I have to go back and review what the current lease they have. They have the lot under lease. They're asking for this adjustment, and as part of that, they wanted some adjustments to the lease that they proposed. So all this is a fluid, moving target at this point. Again, commercial operation, not a privately owned, like resident, I call them, it's probably that very terminology, but like more of a residential style, regular hangar out there. This is a commercial operation, what's being proposed. So they've asked for a few adjustments to the lease. Those have not been finalized or agreed upon at this point. We're still kind of in the starting phases of this. This is still pretty much a preliminary concept. There's still a lot of details that have to be hashed out, from utilities, from, actual layouts, from lot adjustments, from lease adjustments. So this is just kind of, again, the initial view. If there's anything that stands out at this point before we start doing that next level of detail, analysis work, because there is, for the developers, there is a cost associated with getting those numbers together, some significant engineering costs. And we want to make sure that what's brought forward at a future, as this project progresses, that there's not something that could have been addressed at this stage easier on. We could get some direction. And I can definitely bring forward the parking issue. That's one that we already have on our list of, depending upon use, is there enough parking? How do we address the parking situation?
Is a water main required back there, just rather than just a service back to them, or?
There would be, right, the service line would be enough when I talk to the city engineer. Again, based on initial usage, if their use dramatically changes, we might need to adjust that, but at this point, privately fed service extensions would be sufficient to supply these three buildings.
Fire protection is not a problem?
Based on size, it should be served with because there's no sprinkler requirements, correct?
Not if they separate the buildings.
Correct.
If they're separate
Yeah,
buildings?
if they're separate buildings, correct.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I think, I know we have lot 1, And Lot 1 has been redesigned a few times to handle somewhat of a larger building, but this goes way beyond what was originally intended for Lot 1. And I really think that we need I really think the Airport Commission needs to work with the Silas and the airport engineers and figure out what we can do in this area from a growth perspective and as it pertains to our airport layout plan. I mean, we're replanning and remapping what we want to do at the airport. The ALP is what MnDOT Aeronautics uses to help us as we grow our airport and provide aviation services and things like that. And I think we're putting the cart before the horse. I really think that we need to get the ALP. The Airport Commission and the city needs to work with Silas to understand what we can do there. We don't know what Watershed's going to do because this is beyond what our ALP currently allowed for. We don't know what we need to provide for parking in here, and we don't know if this area can support the hangars as they're kind of drawn out here. So I think we need to have time with Silas to understand how we can grow the airport in that direction before we just grow it. I'd be fine, I'm fine if they wanted to take and put in Lot 1 a building similar in size to what exists on the south side of the AD building, but I'm not fine with this plan the way it is with the different size buildings. I think we should support one and only one at this time and work with the ALP to determine how much more we can grow in that direction based on engineering and MnDOT Aeronautics information.
And on that point, I mean, you kind of see they have a potential where they're looking at some additional, layouts up here for, I believe these would be potential future hangars that they've kind of envisioned, would they fit in there? Again, as I've talked with this group, they have their own, like, we could put extra hangars here, here, and here, and I've kind of cautioned that with the Airport Commission has to have a weigh in as to why does this meet the future plans, this future growth for this area. This initiated with the fact they wanted to see if they could do an adjustment just to Lot 1. That's what the primary concern was. And I think it was, when they looked at the original building that would fit, I think there was some issues with, size of that building, so this fits their operation better. I guess just from a 20,000 foot level on this one, I mean, there is some potential impact long range in terms of how the airport develops. However, a little bump in the road probably is not going to prohibit any other future growth in that area. There was some conversation of how would utilities expand out? Would utilities be there in 5 years if that part builds out? Yeah. And we've told them and said, well, we're not going to do a utility investment based on one user at this point. It would have to be part of a larger plan. But then there was also, if the utilities run right by their building on that backside, say where that proposed road would be, their service line extension would be a lot less expensive to hook up to that versus trying to bring them from where they currently are. So there's a lot of questions that still need to be kind of addressed on this one. A lot of details need to be kind of hashed out.
Go ahead.
If I may, one other thing, well, two other points is that will we want to run commercial, down that northerly taxi lane or taxiway? And if we do we have to provide for a paved tarmac like we do for the ones on the south side? But most importantly, and this isn't the first time I brought it up, is that we've got, Don and Sam did a great job putting in the tie downs, to temporarily take care of our needs for tie down. And actually by state law, we have to have tie downs that are usable. But the more pressure we put on having buildings up there, the more we're going to need pavement, with tie downs rather than just grass that's available some of the times, or most of the time, but not all of the time. So I think we need to, I think we've got to consider getting that area paved and get some tie downs that will be usable to help support that commercial business. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Dahlbeck?
I guess building on, extending down further north there, I don't know if that's even feasible. I mean, that's all wetland there. So I'm not sure that we can expand beyond that.
And again, we looked at this just from straight math. There's been no, field inspection work that's been performed. This has all been basically kind of, well, I think a building might fit here, but we haven't actually gone out and taken the shots and done the survey work and done the site analysis work to make sure that this is even, they've done some. I mean, I'm not saying they haven't done any. They've done some, lot look, to see where they might need for some soil estimations to get the pad ready. But again, in terms of that whole future area, that has not been analyzed to a level of, where you could actually do a full layout. I mean, again, this is still a concept. And I think part of the concept, you'll see changes happen as these plans evolve. And, you know, I mean, just one of the flags that we saw on this was, what do you do about the existing taxi lane to get to this building here? I mean, is that, you know, would they be able to access existing taxi lane, and how do we expand that one section out? I mean, that's one concern that was brought forward, is looking at this layout is, you know, originally all these buildings, according to the drawing I received, were all in front of the existing taxiway. So then you start putting numbers behind them, you're starting to see one of these buildings starting to creep out into an area where there's no, you know, taxi lane there. You know, so what do we do about that? You know, I mean, is that an issue? Is that not an issue? Do we need to expand? Do they expand? You know, I mean, so there's a lot of kind of questions and discussions that need to happen to kind of get this next level. And again, we're just kind of looking at, you know, just as at first blush, you know, is this something that, you know, because again, I don't want to recommend to them do this work and all of a sudden have them come back at a subsequent meeting after investing pretty substantially in some engineering work to say, yeah, we're waiting on their full, you know, layouts of this whole area. You know, I kind of want to bring that to them in advance. So give them, you know, good, clear direction as to where kind of the temperature of the commission is.
Chairman?
Yes.
A question for Dan. We talked about Rice Creek Water Association, want to have some say as to whether or not that is even buildable. Whose cost? Is that at the applicant's cost to find that out?
For the engineering portion of it, yeah, and that's where we had the build-back agreement with Bolton and Mink. So as they started to kind of take this, because they're the ones that, I mean, this, you know, basically you look at this, they're proposing a private business out there, you know, and it's part of their development. I mean, this would be part of their development costs, would be doing this work.
So Mr. Ashbeck's question as to whether or not it's even buildable, I don't know about the parking lot. That would be on the applicant's dime?
Just for the lot, yeah. I mean, we wouldn't force them to do the full layout for where the airport could grow in, say, 15 years. It'd be specific to this project. So, yeah, any development costs that are associated with laying out this specific lot one, you know, as it's redesigned here, would fall on the applicant to develop that.
Okay.
Any
I have nothing further.
any further comments or at this time? So at this point, if I understand right, the city will take it and work with them, take it another step to look into costs of.
Yeah, I'll just kind of say there wasn't any, I mean, minus the parking issue and the potential, some of the tax lane extensions at this point, there wasn't really any, I mean, unless I'm hearing incorrectly, that I can basically say there was agreement that, you know, if this takes to the next level, we start doing those number analysis, that there's agreement that this is an okay project for the lot. Is that accurate? I mean, does that sound accurate?
For me, I want to make sure that it fits within our ALP before I make that statement. I'm not opposed to growing to that direction. I'm just want to make sure that we've had good conversation and that engineering and regulatory agencies allow us to get to that direction. And we'll have more ponding areas too with that, so, which everybody's struggling with as it is.
And with that, that concludes all of our agenda items. I know one commissioner brought to my attention that wanted to add for next meeting a discussion on the old T hangars. Is everybody in agreement that we can add that to the next meeting as to discussing the future of those hangars and what's happening there?
I'm okay with that. If I could ask for one other thing to be on next month's agenda would be courtesy car. Instead of delaying this meeting or more on this meeting, if we could add the possibility of a courtesy car at the airport. I'd talked a little bit with Dan and the chief and, well.
Yeah, we can put that on the agenda for next week or
And then
next month.
one last thing is, was it early last week or early into that week where we had the heavy snow melt? I'd asked Dave Adams to go out and open up the catch basins that go between the hangar bays and dumps, you know, to the north, and he was able to do that, and it seemed like it helped alleviate some of the ponding that we get during this time of year, so. Thank you.
All right. Now, I know I violated the agenda and jumped that others from the floor to the beginning here this evening, and it's just 7:10, and we don't have a large audience. Is there anyone who would like to speak now at the end? I don't know, Mr. Schultz, if please, I will open up the microphone to anyone, any comments at this time, following up, sure.
Yeah, Mike Ombold, I've got a hangar up at the airport, and I just want to caution everyone on the adjusting the lease or the rates. You're approaching this almost as if you're marketing a retail item. You know, you're bound by a lease, by Minnesota contract law that you actually wrote and signed. So, there really isn't that much leeway. It's got to be the CPI, and an ordinance 654. You need to discuss that.
Thank you.
May I?
Yes, please.
A capital repayment plan to pave the runway is not rent. The only thing you can charge us for is rent. This position that the city's harboring that, go to arbitration, that is a settlement, but it's not necessary. The language is extremely clear, and this group has no authority to bind us to extra expenses outside of our lease, and that's exactly what happened. And it's wrong. And so there really is no need for arbitration. The city's making a choice, and it's just wrong. The bathroom issue, what's in the contract? I know of no requirement for anybody to put a bathroom in their hangar out at the airport. Shouldn't the group here reflect upon that? And mitigation with the city, it was brought up, it has no bearing on my contract whatsoever. All the people that build hangars out there make a major investment. We don't own the land, we lease it. We need stability. And when you violate it, you violate the agreement, and you make a black mark on the city of Forest Lake.
Thank you.
I'm a little concerned about timeliness. I understand you've had some discussion, you've taken some directions, and you've made some votes. When the discussion was talked about in phase one, requiring that you continue to require bathrooms to be placed in all hangars. The best reason that I heard, perhaps I missed it, was for consistency. Now, my immediate response was about to stand up back there and say, why? There's only about 30, 31 hangars out there, and if a half a dozen of them want to save 5, 10, 15,000 apiece and not put a bathroom in them, then is it really that difficult to put an X on the map and say this guy doesn't have to have a bathroom because he came in later? Why is it required to be consistent? I got to believe that we're smart enough and able enough to be able to determine, well, that one can go with the new rules and not have to spend that money. So anyway, I guess I was looking for more explanation than that. Now, it's kind of water over the dam, under the bridge, however, whatever analogy you want to use. You've already made your decisions. Why can't you put in infrastructure later? This is what you were talking about in phase two. You said, well, if we put in phase two, we got to make the decision whether or not we're going to run water and sewer now. It was stated you can't put it in later. I disagree with that. Having been a long-term partial or shared ownership, aircraft ownership and hangar at Anoka Airport, I know that the infrastructure for sewer and water was put in long after the majority of hangars were established there. So I'm very concerned that it was stated you can't put it in later, as if that is totally accepted by all as a hard and fast rule. I disagree with it because I've witnessed it at a different airport. Another thing that struck me now, we're talking about phase two. perhaps 5 or 6 individual size hangars, and then one larger hangar referred to as a T hangar. Okay. I also watched it talked out about the build out on the north end of the hangar area for essentially what's referred to as Hangar 1. In Hangar 1, if you build out, you expect them to pay the infrastructure fees to run additional things up to them. In Phase 2, where you're going to have a 5-place T hangar essentially, are you then expecting that entire row to be, and all the infrastructure costs associated with that row to be spent or paid for by one hangar owner, the person who would own hangar, the 5-place T hangar? And would you then charge him 5 infrastructure fees to build what is proposed to be a cold structure hangar? I make my living in aviation. I do it through banner towing, flight instruction, and pilot services. I am continually pounded by persons who feel that you got to be rich to get into aviation, and everybody who is in aviation is rich. Well, I can tell you the part about everybody who is in aviation being rich is false. I am perhaps the one and only example of that, but I certainly do not consider myself wealthy. Therefore, I look for ways I'd like to make a little more money or conserve a little money, and I'd like to make it so that others can get into aviation. I know there are certainly many people within this audience who work very hard to bring people into aviation and do a large effort to make it so that they can get into aviation at no expense. And then I come in here and I see numerous places where money could be saved, and not at the expense of safety, not at the expense of any harm, but rather what seems like somewhat arbitrary decisions to increase the cost of aviation. Bathrooms is a simple one, okay? We can say, well, somebody could build a hangar in hangar number 6, it ain't built yet. We've already paid some money for infrastructure, so we need to get that money back out of them. But do we really need to have them put in another 5 or 10 or 20,000? I don't know. The people in the audience can certainly tell you the expense of their hangars. Many of you have built hangars and can tell you the precise amount that it costs to put a darn toilet in a bathroom. It's a place to save a few bucks and let someone to get into it a little cheaper. But yet it appears to me, sitting in the back of the room, that some of these choices are a little arbitrary, and it's not about, can we get others involved in aviation? Can we make it reasonable? Can we do this safely and inexpensively? But rather, well, we kind of like the idea of having toilets in a bathroom, so let's make everybody do that. I would urge you to consider, in all of your future decisions, thinking about ways you may be able to save the person who wants to get into aviation a buck. Next topic, I would also recommend for further meetings, we might consider asking somebody about Rice Creek Watershed, a representative, to maybe stop by at some of these meetings. I don't know, it's kind of a nebulous area for me, but tonight there were a few questions about what can we do around the Hangar 1 area. Is that reaching into the Rice Creek Watershed's control? A meeting or two ago, we had a similar concern about essentially, or what we're calling the Phase 2 area. Is that going into Rice Creek in the drainage? Perhaps it'd be worth inviting someone to that, to meetings from that agency. Thank you for allowing me to speak again at the end. I appreciate not having to wait another month. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Is there a motion to adjourn?
I'll make that motion.
Second? Anyone?
I'll second.
Second, Mr. Dahlbeck. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.